Hi, and welcome to episode 36 of the Breaking Bio podcast. I'm Morgan Jackson. I'm a PhD student at the University of Guelph in Ontario, Canada. And today we've got another co-host and a special guest, Christie Wilcox. But first, we'll talk to Stephen Hamlin.
I'm Stephen Hamlin, postdoc at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia.
And as advertised, we've got Christie Wilcox, who's a PhD candidate at the University of Hawaii here.
Hi, guys.
So why don't you tell us a little about yourself, Christie? What do you usually do at the University of Hawaii besides probably sit on the beach a lot and make fun of all of us mainlanders?
Only like every other day, to be fair. No, so I'm a PhD student. I study lionfish, and I'm looking at them from mostly a genetic perspective, but also doing some venom toxin analysis. And yeah, I get to spend a lot of time diving, and I work on an island, off an island. Coconut Island, which is its own island off the island. I have to take a boat to work. But yeah, that's the basic of my research. It's sort of confusing because my research covers, well, I'm doing general phylogenetic sort of analysis, so looking at the various different species of lionfish, seeing when they diverge from each other, maybe where they diverge from each other, things like that. But then I'm also doing this toxin stuff and looking at the evolution of the toxin. And then I'm also doing this toxin stuff that looks at the whether or not ciguatoxin assays are being thrown off by venom. So kind of have an eclectic PhD coming out.
So you mentioned, we'll talk a little bit about research before we get into some non-research kind of stuff. So you said that you're doing phylogeny work on lionfish species, and me being a bug person didn't realize there was more than one species of lionfish. So I learn things every day on this podcast. How many species of lionfish are there, and are they all as importantly invasive, or is it just one?
So there are about 20 species of lionfish, depending on who you ask, and depending on what my data shows. And there are technically 2 that are invasive, or 2 that might be one that are invasive. So you have Pterois, volitans, and miles. Those are the ones that are your basic classic lionfish, the big, spiny, stripy, frilly things. And they're invasive in the Atlantic, from everywhere from North Carolina down to Venezuela and up into the Gulf of Mexico. Really nasty invasion. And then Pterois miles is also invasive in the Mediterranean, or at least introduced into the Mediterranean. There's a little less information on how far they've gotten and how much they're doing there. But they kind of slipped in from the Red Sea. They're wonderful fish. I mean, I like them, even if they're invasive. They're awesome. I hold my lionfish in the highest regards because they're just cool. I mean, what other fish could you introduce maybe a dozen or 2 dozen to an area and have them take over in a matter of a decade? That's some pretty impressive evolutionary stuff.
So what kind of effects do they have on the local habitat when they invade?
So studies have shown that they'll reduce native fish recruitment by 70% or so on average. So they're voracious predators, which, I mean, they're not any more voracious per se than like a grouper or any other barracuda, any other reef predator. But what they are is completely bizarre looking and have never been seen by the native fish in the Atlantic. They just have no idea what this thing is. And so when they come in, they start eating, and they eat very well, and nobody can really stop them from eating. And then they're ridiculously fertile. The females can reproduce basically on a weekly basis. They'll release 2 million or so eggs every year that can float and travel for hundreds to thousands of miles and spread little baby lionfish everywhere. So,
wow.
That's a whole lot of baby lionfish everywhere.
Yes, and in some places we're seeing densities of hundreds per hectare, which is, I guess the visual in my head is, for example, there's about, I think it was 100 people per hectare in New York City. So if you're talking 450 lionfish, that's like 4 times the density of New York City of lionfish on a reef.
Jesus. That's a lot of invasive lionfish hanging around.
Yep. And what I found out on my recent trip to North Carolina when I was working with lionfish is not only are there are a lot of them, not only are they invasive, not only are they eating everything, but they're actually growing fat. Like they have so much interstitial fat that they are obese.
Obese lionfish.
Yep. There were several individuals that I looked at that actually had signs of liver damage. So obese that they are actually showing like the clinical signs of obesity that we see in like humans and every other animal.
Wow. Did your lionfish have diabetes?
Probably.
Jesus.
Yeah. So I think they're cool. I think that's, I mean, yes, we should probably kill a lot of them and as quickly as possible, but they're really cool.
Well, you got to set up this tiny little reef-based McDonald's, and I think the problem's going to take care of itself, right?
Yes.
So, you mentioned that they're poisonous, that they're venomous, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of effects does that venom have? I haven't run into them.
So, the venom effect, the major number one effect is insane, incapacitating pain. Or as described in the medical literature from around the 50s, just short of maddening. So yeah, what happens is you get stung, and so the venom is in the tissues, in the spine, and potentially in their skin, one of those other things I'm looking at. And anyway, so the venom, it goes in and it turns on all of those like pain nerves that you know, and so it'll start searing and radiating pain. A guy got stung on a boat while I was there actually, and I got to watch this happen. I've never been stung. And he said it was an 8 or so on the 1 to 10 scale for about 2 to 3 hours.
Ouch.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was just like a teeny little prick on his finger.
Wow.
Back to the lionfish, because I'm kind of interested here. Are you studying them pure, like solely in the wild, or doing any lab work, or?
So what I'm doing is a lot of genetics and a lot of protein chemistry. So it's actually very lab-based in a certain way. Everyone else that studies them is out diving and watching them for hours on end, but I'm just taking samples and going back to the lab and playing with them.
How do you? Sorry, can you describe what taking samples entails here?
So I'm looking at the expression of venom proteins throughout the lionfish's body, trying to understand sort of how exclusive to the spines they are or not. And so it usually involves cutting open a lionfish and removing parts of its skin, muscle, liver, brain, spines. I do a lot of very bloody work in that sense. And then from there it gets all pretty and clean, because then it's in little tubes and it's a bunch of pipetting, so.
So you get the best of both worlds then. You get the scalpel in one hand, you get the pipette in the other hand.
Yes, exactly. I get to go out, and I'm comparing it to other species, so I go out and spear some grouper or spear some other things, and then bring them back into the lab and chop them up.
So where are lionfish originally from? If they're invasive in the Caribbean and in various parts around the U.S., where are they originally from, and maybe explain a little bit how they got here, because I doubt they're that great of swimmers.
No. So lionfish, all 20 species are Indo-Pacific, or Indian or Pacific, but somewhere in the Indo-Pacific. The 2 species that are invasive are basically sister species, one of which is the Indian Ocean version, one of which is the Pacific Ocean version. So they're found everywhere in those oceans except for Hawaii, pretty much. And then if you go north enough, they stop appearing. But you can find them in Japan, Indonesia, Red Sea, I mean, off the coast of Africa. So everywhere in the subtropical, tropical, Indo-Pacific. And then they got to our end of the world because they're really pretty. And people really like them. And they are really pretty. They're gorgeous fish. And so they're an extremely popular aquarium fish. And people have been collecting them and sending them back, shipping them to the U.S. for a long time. And best guess is that separate individual lionfish were released by pet owners, probably off the coast of Florida, though potentially other places, but mostly off the coast of Florida. And they found each other and started a happy little population.
It's like a soap opera for lionfish, it sounds like.
Yeah,
separated by miles, two lionfish swam and met each other to start a wonderful life, destroying ecosystems all up and down the East Seaboard.
It's a Bonnie and Clyde story, really.
It's true.
You know.
Really? Because in my head, I'm imagining some sort of like telenovela, you know.
But yeah, so the genetic data anyway suggests that the lionfish in the Atlantic's closest relative is Indonesian populations. So, which is a popular place for aquarium dealers to collect fish. So, it kind of all fits together.
Cool.
You know, while I've got somebody on the line who actually studies invasive species, I've always kind of had a question about invasiveness because, and this just betrays my complete ignorance. I have no background in conservation or anything, but the term invasive strikes me as a little fraught. I mean, like if you wind back the clock far enough, every species is invasive, isn't it?
So the way I view it, and the way that most ecologists view it, is that the term invasive is not used lightly. Invasion doesn't just talk about finding a new place and being in a new place. That's what introduced or alien means. So we have lots of species that are introduced, but if they're not establishing populations, and even if they're establishing populations, but they're not actually causing ecological, economic, or public health consequences, they're not invasive. So that's where the line is drawn. Invasive means they're causing some serious bad stuff to go on.
Bad from our point of view.
Bad from our and usually it talks about restructuring ecosystems or from an ecological perspective, something like that to count as the bad stuff for that. Well, for example, we have wallabies in Hawaii. Did you know that?
No, I did not.
There is a single living population of wallabies in Kalihi Valley on Oahu, which I've yet to see, but I'm really going to try to. And so they're here, they're living, they're breeding, they have a population, they're doing fine on their own. They were the escapees from some rich guy's zoo that he wanted to start way back when. But they're not really doing anything. They're not killing native plants in the area. They're not changing around how the whole valley looks, for example. They're not changing species assemblages. They're just kind of there. And so that's an introduced species, but nobody's trying to get rid of them or trying to eradicate them because they're not really doing anything bad.
Well, so let's shift gears because the way I was first actually introduced to you was through social media, and you're kind of a big deal on the internet. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do on the internet and how you got started with that?
Yeah, so I like this, kind of a big deal on the internet. I want to put that as like my tagline on my website. Anyway, so I got started, I guess you could say, on the internet right after, basically about a year after I graduated from undergrad, and I was working in a lab, which was fun and all, but it was a lot of biomedical work, and it was a lot of cells, and cells take time to grow, and they just sit there and grow. And so I had a lot of downtime, is my point. And my friend from college, Allie Wilkinson, who started the website, This Is What a Scientist Looks Like, if you want to know more about her. But she happened to be going for her master's in journalism at the time, and one of the classes she was taking required her to do this crazy new thing called blogging. And she was like, oh my god, this is so much fun, you should try this out, it's really interesting. And I'm like, I don't know, I was just dilly-dallying around on like Google beforehand. So anyway, I decided to dedicate some of my copious downtime to writing about science news and anything random or geekery that I thought was interesting. And so that was in 2008, and then since then the blog just sort of took off. I'm not entirely sure what I did right or wrong to make it go that way, but people seemed to like what I was writing, and so more people started to read it, and more, and then it got picked up by science blogs, which at the time, before PepsiGate, was the place to blog if you were blogging about science. And then it got picked up by Scientific American, and then in February I moved from Scientific American to Discover. And through that, I ended up getting very involved in social media and shared some opinions on social media. And that also got noticed quite strongly, and so I've sort of become a advocate for scientists using social media.
Which it's good to have you on, because I'm about to give a talk on that in a week and a half. So, you know, there's things I want to bounce off you. We should mention, though, the blog is Science Sushi.
Yep.
And it's what's the URL right now?
It's blogs.discovermagazine.com/science little hidden sushi.
Nice.
Congrats on moving to Discover, by the way. That's a
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to say going from Scientific American to Discover whether that's a big move, but it's a pretty awesome lateral transfer, if nothing more. So,
thank you very much. We were very excited. I was very excited anyway. I don't know if Discover is as excited as I am, but no.
It seems like that's where all the cool kids are these days.
You know, that's where we're not bad.
All right, go on, brush your shoulder off. All right.
We're cool. I love Scientific American as a network. It's a wonderful network. It's the people there are really great, and we have all these fantastic little discussions amongst ourselves. But moving to Discover was awesome for me too, because it's a different audience and a different platform, and working with a different group of people. So I like them both. They're both awesome.
So as you mentioned, you've been an advocate for scientists using social media, and we've talked about this before, both through blogs and on Twitter. So can you make a kind of elevator pitch, succinct case for why scientists should use social media?
So why scientists should use social media, to me, there's sort of like two separate pitches depending on which way you want to go about it. One is the very philanthropic pitch, which is saying that basically I think scientists need to be out there because the public is interested in science. They want to know what's going on, and we're the best people to talk to them about it. And so if we want to do these things like keep people informed on political issues that relate to science, or we want them to have this natural curiosity and to foster this natural curiosity, we need to be the people that they're engaging with. And everyone now is on social media, so that's where they're engaging. So if we're not there, they're not going to engage with us. The other side is the completely selfish, narcissistic side, which is being on social media is a wonderful way to curate your own online reputation. So as a scientist, we used to, once upon a time, the only thing that mattered was your citations, and that's how people would find you, and that's how people would know about you, was this record. And that's important too. But now, basically, any job you apply to, you're going to get Googled. And if what they find is, somebody else's negative rant about your research, that's not going to go as well as them finding your Twitter feed and how, interested and engaged you are in this, or your blog and how, clearly and lucidly you explain your research to other people on your blog, things like that. So there's some very, very positive benefits for the scientists to get out there, and I think there's a lot of very positive benefits for the public for scientists to get out there.
That's interesting. Almost a self-defense view of it. And I'm reasonably sold on the benefits to the scientist. But the more I look into it, the less I'm convinced of the assumed benefits for the public. Right? This idea that if we have, I've caricatured this before as, just give every scientist a Twitter account and everything will be fine. And I know that's not what anybody's actually saying, but if you take it out to that extreme, if every scientist did have a Twitter account, would public engagement with science be any better? And my feeling on this is no. Right? For one thing, I would expect that if all these SciComm things were having the benefits they should be, then we should see a relationship between the amount of SciComm going on and scientific literacy in the public, or scientific engagement, in the public. And that doesn't seem to be the case, right? Scientific literacy is flat.
So?
Well,
has SciComm increased?
Well, if you take the naive view that, we have Twitter now, and we have blogs, and we have all of these methods for scientists to reach out directly to the public, then the assumption is that it's increased.
See, I would argue that it probably hasn't increased enough, or enough for an impact, right? We're talking about invasive species, right? You put two fish into an ocean, and how many does it take before they're invasive? How many scientists does it take on these very broad scale, very large platforms before their voices are actually really intermingling with the public's? And I think the answer is we probably haven't actually increased our SciComm efforts substantially enough to see the impacts that we want to see, especially when it comes to stuff like science literacy.
And that's where I wonder, though, because if we just turn up the volume, is it going to have the effect you think? Is there a threshold we have to cross? Or, is it, I mean, half the internet is porn and the other half is the Kardashians, right? Maybe the scientists, maybe people don't want enough SciComm. Maybe the equilibrium, maybe we're already at an equilibrium, right?
I would disagree. The studies have shown that people have a broad interest in science. They highly respect scientists. They find them to be very engaging and interesting. They love things like Discovery Channel and National Geographic and all of these sort of what we've done so far in terms of SciComm efforts. I think they're very interested. I mean, I've got 9,000 or so people that are very interested in me for some reason. So I think that's, that in and of itself is a anecdotal, albeit evidence that if you do talk about science and you talk about it in a way that people can understand, people will actually care and will start to follow. I mean, it's why these blogs are doing so well as of late anyway.
But that's kind of the problem. We talk to scientists on Twitter, and it's an echo chamber, right? We'd all like to think that we're having this effect, but you may have 9,000 followers, but how many scientists are in the top 1,000 on Twitter?
Well, of course. I mean, but that's how many scientists are going to get into the top 1,000 on Twitter unless you have more scientists on Twitter?
That's what I'm questioning, though. Are they going to get there anyways, right? Is it just a matter?
Some definitely will. I mean, Neil deGrasse Tyson's up there.
I was going to say that would be the one I would throw out.
Yeah, I mean, yes, they are fewer than the Insta reality TV celebrities and those that are perhaps more in the public eye, but they are there, and I would say that the pipeline of science communication is pretty leaky and does spring out in places and get some attention from time to time, especially when, something topical comes up and then these blogs can pounce on it and they go viral.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I mean, from my personal experience, some of my favorite comments and things that I get are from people who have absolutely nothing to do with science. And they're like, I'm a mom and my daughter was, thinking about, my 8-year-old daughter wants to be a marine biologist and she stumbled on your blog and she really loves it. And, thank you for writing this, that kind of stuff. And I see that. I get that from my comments. I get that from emails. I get that from my Twitter feed. I know that these are not just scientists, that I'm not only talking to people who are already in the loop. And that
but there are people who are already interested in the loop.
Everyone's interested in science. Everyone is. I mean,
No.
Until a certain age and until a certain thing, a lot of people are. Look at kids, for example. Everyone talks about the need to get more science literacy into kids. Kids love science. It's easy to convince kids into science. You show them something gooey and they go nuts. So that's the easy side. And then it's getting them into the right science or getting them to want to listen to the science on a specific issue. That you can't do with an education platform. It's already been shown. It's called the deficit model, essentially. People think like, oh, we need more science literacy. That's when we're going to have everyone listen to us on biotechnology. Well, no, the more information you give them, that doesn't change their opinions because people don't form opinions from information alone. They form it from interaction. They form it from discussion. They form it from people that they trust. And if scientists aren't in these social networks, in addition to their informational networks, then we're not becoming a part of that dialogue and we're not becoming a part of the group of people that people trust. That was my rant.
I think it's legitimate. I think the difference, though, is assuming that people are going to follow a scientist, everybody's going to follow a scientist on Twitter all the time, versus be interested in a specific topic for 5 minutes once a year, which I think is something to take into account. No, people are probably not going to subscribe to the science Twitter fire hose all the time. But if as a community we can do enough to keep, something interesting coming up from once in a while, we may entice somebody to come in and start thinking about a question or asking a question. They're not going to become, science advocates that are going to start reading Discover blogs every day, 3 times a day, probably, but they may start thinking about it a little bit differently. So I don't think it's necessarily have to be 24/7 science. Everybody in the U.S. has to be 24/7 science,
right?
As long as they consider it at some point.
That's definitely right. I mean, and I think the idea of thinking that people are going to follow every word of a scientist on Twitter doesn't understand the purpose of Twitter in the first place. You don't follow everything that anyone says. let alone what this one person says. I mean, I don't follow everything that the people I like and respect the most say, because that's not what Twitter does. Twitter is this deluge of information. It's this deluge of links and thoughts and feelings and communications and dialogues. And usually what you do is you take a little teacup and you have a little sip of the waterfall every once in a while when you have a few minutes to spare. You don't engage in this constant, like, absorption of it.
I'm doing it wrong, then, is what you're saying.
You're doing it wrong. Yes. No, I mean, and it's something with scientists. One of the biggest questions I get with regards to Twitter, they're just like, how can you follow more than 5 people? Like, I'm overwhelmed. And I'm like, well, then you're doing it wrong, because you're not supposed to follow everything that 5 people say. I don't care everything that you say in a given day. I just don't. I care about the things that I find interesting, and that's Twitter has a way of filtering that for us. It's, you know, looking at it and we say, like, oh, well, if this guy who I find interesting and seems to tweet good stuff, he tweets a link, I'm probably going to consider clicking on it. Whereas I may never have seen that news article or scientific paper or whatever if I didn't, you know, already have this preset Twitter filter that sends me awesome stuff from awesome people.
I'm not going to lie. I've read what little research there is on this, and again, the benefits to scientists seem pretty clear, right? So from a purely narcissistic point of view, I think it's brilliant.
See, I find that really funny, because usually what I get when I give a conference talk or talk to a university or something is the exact opposite. Everyone's like, well, yeah, it's great that we can, you know, help all these people, but what am I getting out of it?
Well, no, I'm saying in terms of what can actually be supported, right? You know, when we say things like, you know, Twitter is a benefit to scientists, I feel that's a statement that actually has data to support it. Whereas, you know, Twitter is a service that benefits the scientific understanding by the public, I don't think there is evidence for that. And in fact, I think most of the available theory and just general basic sense about statistical sampling suggests that that's not supportable right now with what we have, and may not even be true. Right?
I think part of the problem is, you know, as we're talking as scientists, is experimental design. I mean, it's hard to show correlations with sort of large scale where you don't have manipulative power, right? You can't experiment and, like, cut people off and be like, okay, these Twitter users are never going to be able to see a scientist on Twitter, and these Twitter users are going to have, like, the full deluge of scientists around them, and let's see what happens between them, right? We don't have that power. We can't design that experiment. All we can do is sort of look back and reflect and say, like, well, do we see changes in literacy, or do we see changes in these things? And then part of the problem is then if you don't have a whole lot of scientists on Twitter, you're not really getting a whole large sample to go from, right? You don't, you know, what we can say is, okay, well, we know that this scientist had these measures of success when they did this. I mean, I think arsenic life is a great example of a measurable, you know, change and benefit coming from a scientist being out there and being on a blog and on Twitter and talking about things and changing the conversation about science. But we don't have, those examples are hard to come by when you're talking about big data, like, or big sets of groups of people like we want to know if we're really changing the whole world, right? If we're not just changing this little, you know, it's the same problem that museums have, like, right? If a museum, like, how do you know if your museum is being educational? Well, there's certain things you can do and certain things you can't do, right? There's only certain ways to measure it.
Well, not if they change the laws the way I think they should.
Says the theoretician who's already had some rather odd experimental choices.
Cook and IRB be damned.
That's come up before too. You'd be surprised if you watch back in old episodes.
No, I mean, and I think we see some very interesting things. And like I said, right now, part of the problem is actually just a lack of research on it. You're right. I mean, you say that there are only certain things that we can support. Well, yes, there are only certain things that we can support, but that's because we've only done research on those. Nobody's done the
I think there's only certain things we can support, and some really wild statements about what could be going on. Statements like, well, Twitter has 200 million users, so yay, science calm. You know, like, the link from point A to point B is just not there, right? The fact that Twitter has 200 million users doesn't mean anything in terms of scientific communication. All it means is that there's this huge audience which we may have no ability to connect with.
But we can show some of that if we do the research. And that's a field that I'm now just starting to get into myself, and that we're starting to see happen, and I think we should do more of. So, for example, a question I have is, how much does outreach, or say writing an article that gets published by this place, or whatever, what kind of impact does that make? You're right. How many people actually saw it? How many people actually cared? And for some of that, we can get data. We can use search queries and Twitter to look at conversations about topics, for example. And we can see experimentally, to a certain extent, if we say, you know, I am going to talk very specifically for a week about this, right? How does that change the Twitter conversation versus if I don't talk about it for the week before, right? We can actually do some of that. And I think that's a place that a lot more scientists need to go into and do the research as well.
I think that's something we definitely have to do. So I'm going to jump in here, and we're going to quickly wrap up. For those that are listening at a later date, I suspect that Stephen is not quite happy with not having the last word on this. So if you're listening live, we'll keep going for a little bit, and that's a good reason to watch us live, usually on Wednesday afternoons. So thank you very much, Christie, for joining us on Breaking Bio, episode 36. It was great talking to you and learning all about lionfish and SciComm. Anybody at home, you can find us at breakingbio.com or on Twitter at breakingbio. And we hope you'll join us next week for, I'm sure, what will be another thrilling discussion. So, thanks.